Happy Wednesday, and thank you for joining us for our community meeting. We just make sure, sorry for the delay in getting going. We're making sure that we had Adam Berry on, and we see him now, and we have a great meeting ahead of us. So in keeping with the spirit of being timely with these meetings, I will get us going and apologize for being a couple minutes late. Hope everyone's enjoying this. I guess it's our delayed onset of winter. I think some of us have been enjoying the warmer weather, though I think we're pining also for snow. So hopefully you're all looking ahead to a lovely Thanksgiving break and getting outside as well. Welcome to our November Western Resilience Center community meeting. I'm Michelle Stewart, Executive Director of Western Resilience Center, which many of you knew formerly as Yampa Valley Sustainability Council. And I thank you all for joining us today for this meeting. Western Resilience Center was established as a nonprofit in 2009, and we are guided by the mission to serve as a leader, resource, and catalyst for building a sustainable and resilient Yampa Valley region. These topic-focused monthly community meetings are designed to convene community partners and members for presentations and discussions on key issues and initiatives so that we can learn together, ask questions, connect, and find ways to meaningfully contribute to the sustainable and resilient future that we need. Today, we have the great pleasure of having Adam Berry from the Colorado Energy Office joining us as our featured speaker, and he's here to talk about the new model low energy and carbon code. I am, in just a short moment, going to turn the floor over to Paul Boney, Western Resilience Center's Energy and Transportation Director, who is going to introduce Adam and also facilitate our question and answer following Adam's talk. But I'll just briefly remind you, when you're not talking, please do keep your microphones on mute. The chat can be used to share resources, and I invite people to do that or ask questions as Adam is talking. And we really look forward to a Q&A to follow. So I believe that we have some questions teed up, but really this is an opportunity for us to hear from Adam and have close contact with the state, and really looking forward to the conversation. So at this time, Paul, I will turn it over to you to introduce our featured speaker.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all of those who've given us an hour or so today, and a special thanks to Adam. Adam's position is the advisor for building decarbonization at the Colorado Energy Office, and his work covers both building decarbonization policy and Colorado's advanced energy code development through the Colorado Energy Code Board. And I've had the pleasure to work with Adam a couple of occasions before today's call, and I want to say it's really great to work with a guy who has a degree in political science from one of my home states, Kansas, and who can nerd out with me on building technology. So it's really a pleasure to have that resource in the state's energy office. I think you'll find Adam's presentation very informative, especially given the fact that we are midway through our old energy code adoption. So our Routt County Building Department will be developing our new building energy codes for implementation in 2027. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the process, our building official, Todd Carr, who would love to be here today, but he's actually out doing inspections while everybody's trying to get their projects done. He's a little shorthanded in his department this month. So Todd will spend most of next year educating the building community, designers, building officials, government officials on the new energy codes. And then that will be coming to all the Routt County governments for adoption in 2027. The work that Adam's going to talk to you about today is foundational. I don't want to steal his thunder, but the work Adam has done will be incorporated by state statute into our local building codes. And then, as Michelle mentioned, after Adam's presentation, we've reserved time for questions and answers. So either raise your hands with the little raise hand button, or you can type those in the chat. So you don't want to hear me talk, but you do want to hear Adam. So Adam, the floor is yours, sir.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks, Michelle, both for inviting me here. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about a topic that I think many would say is boring, but I don't think is boring, and that's building energy codes. So gonna run through, as Paul mentioned, kind of the new information about our state model low energy and carbon code. I also just don't want to presume that anybody on the call is an energy code expert because I know most people are not. So I just wanted to run through a little bit just about kind of how energy codes work. What do they do? What do they govern? What do they not govern? Um, so just generally speaking, and this has been historically true, and I'll kind of expand on this on the next slide as well, but energy codes generally are governing energy efficiency requirements for new construction and large renovations of residential and commercial buildings. So there's a residential energy code, there's a commercial energy code, and they're all in the International Energy Conservation Code. Um, Energy codes generally govern everything you would assume relates to energy consumption in buildings. So that starts with kind of that building envelope. So that's windows, walls, doors, ceilings, the slabs that you're building properties on, all of those things, crawl spaces, everything associated with the exterior of your building, and all the insulation requirements, how much air leakage is permitted under the code, how efficient your windows and doors have to be, window U factors, insulation R values, those kinds of things. Addressing things like thermal bridging, which is a newer concept being addressed in the energy code, basically where heat finds alternative ways when you have a really nice and tight insulated building, an air sealed building. When you have like metal or something penetrating that thermal envelope, heat will find a way to use those conductive materials to escape elsewhere. And so addressing those kinds of issues as well. So all the things that go into that envelope around the building. They address mechanical systems, so anything related to HVAC, water heating, including within HVAC, ventilation systems, ductwork, how well that all has to be sealed up, and operational and how efficient your equipment has to be. Lighting, same thing, how much lighting efficiency you have to achieve. And controls that relate to these types of systems. So how those systems are actually operated and controlled. For those who are not super familiar with how the energy code works, there's kind of two different ways to comply with the energy code. One is a prescriptive pathway. You'll hear me talk a lot about prescriptive and performance throughout the presentation. The prescriptive pathway is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It prescribes what you need to do with all of the different elements of the thermal envelope, the mechanical systems, and the lighting in order to comply with the code. If you do all those things and the plan reviewers approve it and you build it that way and the inspectors sign off, then you comply with the energy code. There's also the performance-based approach, which basically has some requirements on how, like prescriptive requirements that you must meet, but largely is just energy performance targets that are identified through modeling, energy modeling, and then verified through actual on-site inspection of installation of those modeling assumptions. So that's kind of generally historically how the energy code has always worked. These are the elements that the energy code has always addressed. And this has been true for decades now. And we continue to address a lot of these issues through our state energy code as well. But there's also a number of newer issues that are starting to be addressed in the energy code. And I think they generally tend to move in the direction of decarbonization as opposed to just strictly energy efficiency as the energy code has done in the past. These types of things relate to electrification. So encouraging adoption of those high efficiency heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, heat pump or otherwise electric dryers. If you don't already use those, which I think most people do, but there are still some gas versions out there. Renewable energy. So while the energy code has generally always focused on reduction of the consumption of energy within the building, it's also starting to address now not only the energy consumed by the building, but also potentially the energy produced by the building. So there are opportunities to consider renewable energy, both requirements and options for within the energy code. EV charging is another one. So I think we all are probably fairly familiar that EVs don't have the traditional fueling approach that internal combustion engine vehicles do. Most charging is done at home or at work. And so therefore we need to make sure we are incorporating requirements for EV charging in our energy code and making sure they are being incorporated into our buildings. And then I threw this last one on here, and you can see it's noted that it's not actually in our state energy code right now. But there are also some considerations for embodied carbon. For those who are not familiar with embodied carbon, that's basically the carbon associated with the production, transportation, construction and disposal of building materials. So all of the emissions associated with all of those different phases of life for materials that go into our buildings. So as I said, our state energy code does not directly address embodied carbon, although we are working on a separate voluntary state code that will address embodied carbon. So if you have questions on that, I won't be really talking about it today, but always happy to talk about that at a future time. And so kind of where does the state energy code play into the broader ecosystem in Colorado? I think you all know that we are a home rule state, and therefore building codes and energy codes are adopted locally. So Routt County and all of your municipalities adopt the energy code, and then the county enforces that code for you. And so kind of, the state creating this new state energy code is a little bit of a different approach than has historically been taken in Colorado, where it requires that any jurisdiction that updates or adopts any building code to adopt whatever the state minimum energy code is, or something more stringent than that code. And so you can kind of see we've had multiple laws taken into effect over the last few years. It started way back in 2019. And the most recent law that is currently in place took effect on July 1st of 2023, basically saying that anytime a jurisdiction updates their energy code or their building code, they must adopt at least the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, plus the electric ready, solar ready, and EV ready requirements that the state has previously published a couple of years ago. I'm very happy to say that Routt County has already met this threshold. You guys are already doing this, which is great. Really appreciate the leadership that we're seeing in your region in implementing these pretty advanced energy codes, early in the process and not waiting to do it until someone forces you to. So we're really excited about that. And Paul mentioned Todd Carr, and you guys have a really great building official in your region, and he's very motivated to help support advancing these codes and really doing what it takes for the community to implement them effectively. So really excited to see that. And so kind of what this next step then is, any code that's adopted or updated after July 1st of 2026, so next July, this new low energy and carbon code is going to be required. And you're going to see me refer to that as the MLECC pretty regularly here. So when you see that acronym, that's what it's standing for. And so we'll talk a lot about what the requirements are and how this new code is going to work. So I kind of already talked about this. You can kind of see this map shows you Colorado's kind of still, even with this minimum energy code, a little bit all over the map when it comes to what's being adopted. And those jurisdictions with that lightest color are on the newest code. So like I said, Routt County is doing very well on one of the newer codes relative to the rest of the state. And as jurisdictions continue to adopt newer codes, and they will more progressively adopt the state energy codes, and we're hoping to see more growing consistency in this map over time. So talking about the low energy and carbon code itself, as I mentioned, this is the new minimum energy code, goes into effect July 1st of next year. It will replace the current minimum energy code, which is that 2021 IECC, and the state's model electric ready and solar ready code, which you all have already adopted. The new energy code is based on the 2024 version of the IECC, although it is fairly heavily modified in many ways. So there are many elements of the IECC that will remain, but some Colorado specific changes that we'll talk about. We published the amendments to the 2024 IECC, so the list of amendments that we have developed as part of this low energy and carbon code on September 2nd. And we are also going to be working with the International Code Council to produce a formal Colorado energy code as well. So it won't just be a package of amendments that the building department and all of you will have to work with, but it will actually be a consolidated code. There are two kind of really main focus areas or priorities that the legislature directed the state to take into account when developing the requirements of this code. One of those is very much in line with, I think, what all of you are here for, which is maximizing emissions reductions from our new construction. And then the other was to make sure we are prioritizing housing affordability in making the changes that we make. So those are kind of two overarching themes you will see fairly consistently as I talk through the different changes today. So kind of looking at what these high-level significant changes are in the low energy and carbon code relative to the 2024 energy code. The first of those is a concept called fuel debiasing. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next couple slides. Encouraging but not mandating electrification. I cannot emphasize this enough that this code is not an electrification mandate. There are still very much viable options for alternative fuels to be used where they are necessary or where the design essentially requires or they are the best solution for that property. But the code is structured in a way to encourage electrification where it is viable. Creating different home sizes and different requirements based on those home sizes. So this will get a lot to the affordability consideration that I mentioned on the last slide. Demand responsive control capabilities. So a lot of times we get questions about how we are managing the grid when we are trying to electrify all of these buildings. And this is one of the ways that utilities have to manage grid capacity and grid congestion is to have opportunities to actually influence the demand side of that electricity consumption. And so this code will have requirements for controls that enable a utility to do that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. On-site renewable energy requirements and mandates that exist in the 2024 IECC have been removed, so there's no longer mandatory on-site renewable energy requirements. And then we've made some simplification of some of the compliance options and made some other prescriptive changes that I won't spend too much time on because they're kind of smaller changes, but I'm always happy to address any questions folks have if they have any about those. So we'll jump in first to the kind of main first topic, fuel debiasing. So what do we mean by fuel debiasing? So if you have worked with the energy code for a long time, you will know that there are kind of different requirements in the code based on whether or not you utilize fossil fuel-based equipment or whether you utilize all electric equipment. There's a couple of different ways in which that kind of presents itself. One of the ways is in that prescriptive pathway of the energy code. There are minimum efficiency, minimum performance requirements for HVAC equipment, water heating, as all those appliances and equipment, as I mentioned. And I think, as is pretty common knowledge now, heat pumps and heat pump water heaters are able to achieve higher efficiency levels, higher performance levels than their fossil fuel counterparts. And the federal minimum efficiency requirements, which is what the energy code bases those minimum efficiency requirements on, are distinctly different depending on whether or not you're talking about fossil fuel-based equipment or all electric equipment. The federal minimum efficiency rating for a residential furnace, for example, residential natural gas furnace, is you have to be 80% efficient. So 80% of the energy within the natural gas is converted into heat in that system. Whereas a minimum efficiency heat pump, depending on the category and the size, might be anywhere from 150% to 300% or greater efficiency, meaning that for every unit of electricity they are consuming, they're putting out anywhere from 1.5 to 3 or more units of heat. And so inherently, these all-electric systems operate more efficiently and convert energy more efficiently into heat. And historically, the Energy Code has not addressed that issue. Basically, it has allowed minimum efficiency equipment, whether it is the minimum gas efficiency or the minimum heat pump efficiency, to be effectively treated the same under the Energy Code. This is also true on the performance-based side of the code, where it's done differently, but the bias nonetheless remains in that the Energy Code has historically been modeled based on how much your building's anticipated cost of energy will compare to a baseline model. And so when you look at cost of energy, I think we also all know that natural gas tends to be cheaper than electricity. And so when you look at those cost-based models, electrified buildings don't have the same ability to compete with natural gas fueled buildings. And so because of that, in both of those pathways, all electric properties are inherently disadvantaged under the code as it has been previously structured. And so one of the things that this Energy Code Board did in creating or in modifying the International Energy Code was to adjust how these codes work to create a more level playing field for those fossil fuel based projects and all electric projects. And so that's kind of what we mean by fuel debiasing. We no longer want all electric projects to have a harder time complying with the energy code than mixed fuel projects do. And historically, they always have. And so this code levels the playing field in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is within that performance-based pathway. As I mentioned, the energy code historically has based modeling on energy costs of a proposed project versus a baseline. And now we have transitioned that to be the energy consumption of the proposed project versus the baseline. What this does is it essentially eliminates any bias that cost differences between those fuel types provides. A unit of energy is the same whether it's coming from a unit of natural gas, a unit of electricity, a unit of propane, or other fuel types, oil, whatever fuel you may be using. One British thermal unit of energy is one British thermal unit of energy, and that is true across the spectrum. And so it takes out that bias that the energy cost option essentially implemented against all electric properties. It also provides a greater consistency. So regionally across the state of Colorado, as well as across the United States, energy costs vary significantly. I mean, in the Front Range, we have very different energy costs than what you all have up in Routt County. And what those look like in Pueblo and other parts of the state are all very different. And so basing a compliance criteria on a moving target like that is really challenging from a consistency perspective. It makes it very difficult for designers and builders to operate in multiple jurisdictions where those costs range wildly, and maybe one design in a particular community doesn't work in another community because those energy costs are different. And so site energy use allows for that consistency across. Again, a BTU, like a BTU of energy is the same no matter what fuel you're using. It's also the same no matter where it's being used. And so it provides that opportunity for consistency everywhere, and it provides an opportunity to level that playing field across all the fuel types. So what we're really trying to do is make a more fuel neutral code. And by doing so, what that ends up doing is it actually makes all electric projects easier to do under the state code because they were previously biased against under the energy code. And so this is kind of gets us into this encouraging electrification topic. So I said I'm going to beat the drum about the fact that we are encouraging and not mandating electrification, and I'm going to keep beating that drum. If there's one major thing I want you all to take away from this, it's that encourage, not mandate phrase there. And the way we're doing that is kind of twofold. Is one, making that IECC base code more fuel neutral by reducing the requirements essentially that applied to those all electric properties relative to their gas counterparts. And so that is kind of creating that fuel debiasing, creating that fuel neutrality. And you have to do that in different ways in the different pathways of the code because they treat the code, the code treats buildings differently, as I was kind of describing. And so within the prescriptive pathway, the way we've addressed this is essentially providing more credit for properties that use heat pumps to recognize that efficiency difference that you are seeing from that heat pump relative to the lowest efficiency equipment that you could have put in that building. So if the code basically says the worst you can do is put in that 80% efficient fossil fuel furnace, then the code will say if you put in something better than that, like a heat pump, then you will get extra credit towards compliance with the code by doing that inherently just by choosing that equipment. Even if it still only meets the minimum efficiency that a heat pump is required to achieve, we're still trying to recognize the difference that efficiency gain gets you. In the performance-based pathway, this is adjusting the performance targets for how buildings actually will be measured compared to that baseline. So basically allowing electric properties to meet a less stringent target to try to, again, encourage movement in that direction towards electrification, but still allowing, alternative performance-based targets for those mixed fuel buildings. And so this will ultimately enable and encourage electrification more effectively than has previously been done under the Energy Code. It will make it easier to build with electricity, not necessarily harder to build with gas or other fossil fuels. So I think that's another message, encouraging, not mandating, and easier with electricity, not necessarily harder with fossil fuels. So next I'll kind of dive into on the residential side, this home size discussion that we have been talking about for some time. I think there are a number of jurisdictions in Colorado, and forgive me, I'm not sure if Route County is one of them. I believe I see Paul nodding his head, so I think you are one of them. But we've seen this pretty consistently in a number of our mountain communities across the state, addressing different sizes of homes differently when it comes to their energy performance. There's a lot of different reasons as to why we do this. Affordability is one of the most important ones. We really want to make sure we are factoring in as low of a first cost as we can for those really, smaller starter home, affordable units. We really want to make sure we still want energy efficient homes. We still want to encourage electrification of those homes, but we want to try to minimize the first cost impact that this code will have on that sector of housing. We don't care as much in the larger homes about affordability because, generally speaking, somebody who's building a 5,000 square foot home or a 7,500 square foot home, or God forbid, things larger than that, which I know you all see up there, generally speaking, affordability is probably not the main thing on their mind. And it's not the main consideration that they are taking into account when having to comply with this code. And so what this code does, probably similar to what you have in Route County and what other mountain communities have done in the state, is create different requirements alongside 3 different tiers of sizes of homes. The smaller the home, the lower the stringency, the larger the home, the more stringent the code becomes. And so those 3 tiers are that smallest tier. I always hesitate to call it small because I think most people would argue 5,000 square feet is not particularly small. But that's the smallest tier, is anything less than 5,000 square feet. That middle tier, or what we're calling large here, is anything between 5,000 and 7,499 square feet. And then anything above that, above 7,500, is going to be considered an extra large home. And the requirements of the Energy Code are going to continue to increase as you go up that scale. So what are we looking at? What do we think is going to happen to each of those properties as that size increases? Keeping in mind that when I talk about the level of stringency or level of efficiency gain we anticipate seeing here, this still accounts for that fuel debiasing and policies encouraging electrification. So this is kind of in addition to that, the efficiency gains we are expecting to see here. So that smallest tier, from a stringency perspective, from an energy performance perspective, we expect that to largely align with the 2024 Energy Code's performance level. So if you were to build a home under the 2024 IECC, chances are it would perform about as well as what a smaller home under our code would perform. For that large tier, that 5,000 to just under 7,500 square feet tier, we're anticipating, depending on the compliance path, it differs depending on whether you're doing prescriptive or performance or the HERS rating method. There's 3 different options in the residential code. But across those different pathways, somewhere between a 7 and a 10% efficiency improvement through increased envelope upgrades, better, higher efficiency HVAC equipment, things like that. And then that extra large tier is going to require a net zero operational energy. And so what we mean by that and what the Energy Code requires for that is a pretty high performance threshold from an energy efficiency perspective. So maximizing the performance of your building thermal envelope, having really highly efficient equipment, really efficient lighting, really robust controls in place. And then whatever energy use you have remaining after you've built that really highly efficient building, you have to design an on-site renewable energy system to offset the remainder of that energy use. So inherently, you are a net to zero. Any energy you use, you are generating as much or more energy from an on-site renewable energy system to offset the energy consumption. Getting next into demand response and renewable energy. So I mentioned kind of our main goal with demand response is really grid management and opportunities for utilities to be engaged in active management of the electric grid as we continue to see higher rates of electrification. And what that looks like is equipment, as I said, that is capable of participating in a demand response program. So demand response means usually, when a customer opts in to a demand response program, you have the utility basically have the ability to come in, and if you're in the middle of the winter and your thermostat is set at 74 degrees, what the utility might do during a peak event, which means higher demand generally than you're able to meet with your electricity generation resources, they will actually be able to adjust your thermostat potentially to down a couple of degrees so that your equipment turns off temporarily. Or if you have, for example, like a multi-stage heat pump, it might be able to reduce the power or reduce how much output that heat pump is giving you to reduce the electricity demand that it is creating. This is true for HVAC systems, water heating and lighting systems in commercial buildings. And on the residential side, the code only requires this for water heating systems. And I think another thing to really emphasize here that has been misconstrued in recent months is that all this is requiring is that these pieces of equipment are capable of participating in one of these programs. The choice of whether or not to actually participate in a program is dependent on whether, first of all, your utility even offers one, or if your utility does offer one, a customer would have to opt in to participating in that program. So just because your equipment is capable, which is what the code requires, doesn't necessarily mean that all customers will opt into one of those programs. But we want to ensure that any customer who wants to opt into those programs is equipped to do so without having to go to extraordinary lengths to allow the utility to control their equipment. So next, we'll talk about renewable energy. So as I mentioned, this is not something that generally has been in the energy code, because most of what the energy code is all about is how we take energy out of the building, how we use less of it, not necessarily where the energy comes from. But I think there's also recognition that our buildings provide a unique opportunity for production of electricity, particularly renewable electricity. We all have rooftops that are all facing the sun, or nearly all facing the sun at some point during the day, right? A particularly good use for solar, and provides opportunities for our buildings to contribute to our utility scale electricity generation. So that might seem, what I just said might seem at odds with what I'm about to say, but I'll bring it home, I promise. So we have actually gone and reviewed the energy code, and within the 2024 version of the energy code, all commercial buildings were required to have an on-site renewable energy system. Every single one had to have a certain amount of renewable energy depending on the size of the building. And in reviewing that requirement, there were a number of considerations taken into account. One was how much mandating those kinds of systems is going to cost, which it is a significant cost. The context of requiring on-site renewable energy in Colorado's broader ecosystem, given other goals and mandates we have for what the utilities have to do in terms of transitioning towards renewable energy. And so between those two considerations, we evaluated that and decided to make renewable energy systems not mandatory, but still absolutely viable pathways for them to be used voluntarily to comply with the code. So no longer under our code do you have to install a commercial on-site solar system. It may not be solar, but most likely it would be. But there are still options to use solar to help comply with the code rather than doing potentially some other things. So it's a voluntary measure now, no longer mandatory. And we still absolutely through, as I mentioned, we have, solar, EV, and electric ready requirements. We still absolutely want to enable buildings to utilize solar that choose to utilize solar. We want to encourage solar development where it makes sense for buildings. But there are just some cases where solar is going to be not advantageous for the property. It's going to be expensive enough that it will actually potentially make the project non-viable. And we don't want that kind of mandate to get in the way of properties being built. And so, the moral of the story is still encourage it, still support the use of renewable energy, but just didn't feel that it was important enough to mandate it in the current Colorado ecosystem. So I mentioned earlier that, and I think you all are probably aware, seeing as Routt County has adopted these requirements, that electric, solar, and EV ready requirements are already part of Colorado's minimum energy code. So I won't spend too much time talking about these, but just to note that the low energy and carbon code has actually updated a few of the requirements. So when you adopt the low energy and carbon code, there will be some revisions, some improvements to these requirements that we implemented in the new code to try to learn from some of the early experiences that some of our jurisdictions and our projects were running into when complying with these requirements. And so we have made some adjustments to make them a little bit easier to comply with and clearer as to what the requirements are. So again, if there's any questions about what those changes are, I'm always happy to talk about them. But there are, just so you are aware, that there are a few updates to those. And then I mentioned at the top, one of the things that we tried to do with this code was recognize how complex building codes in general have become, and that is applicable to the energy code as well. When the energy code was first published, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 pages, and now the energy code is somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 pages, 800 pages. Very, very long code with a lot of requirements in it, and has become more and more complex over time. And one of the priorities of the Energy Code Board in developing this low energy and carbon code was to try to, as much as we could, address some of the additional complexities that have come into the code over time. And so one of these is within the prescriptive pathway of the code. There are some of these. So as I mentioned, prescriptive is, your long list of things to do with your envelope, your mechanical systems, your lighting. If you check all those boxes, you're compliant. There's also, in addition to those requirements, some extra credits you have to get in order to comply with the code now. This is one of the ways that the code has increased stringency over time, is rather than always dialing up the prescriptive requirements, it's, well, we'll keep the prescriptive requirements at a relatively reasonable level, and then we'll require you to achieve some additional benefit on top of those base level requirements. And the 2024 IECC made this whole process really, really complicated. It created multiple sets of credit requirements, multiple different types, all of this different complexity. And so one thing that the Energy Code Board did was say, well, we like the way that the 2021 IECC did this a lot more than we like the way that the 2024 IECC did this. 2021 was a lot simpler, it was a lot more straightforward. And so we have basically modified these additional new categories of these credits, as you can see on the left, and we combined them all into just one set of credit requirements, similar to the way it is in the 2021 code. So again, taking something that was more complex, making it simpler, but still ultimately achieving the goals that we want to achieve. And so I just wanted to talk about how, I talked about all of these things about we want to encourage electrification. We want to encourage efficient, we really want highly efficient buildings. We want all of these things. And a lot of people ask me, how do we know whether your code is going to actually do what you think it's going to do, or that you wanted it to do? And so we have done some preliminary, the Energy Office itself has not done it. We've worked with an energy modeler who actually was a member of our Energy Code Board to do some initial modeling of a few different scenarios of projects that they are working on today. So I can't talk too much about the specifics of these examples because they are actual projects that are being worked on. But we were looking at those projects to say, okay, they were designed under the 2021 Energy Code. They looked at what would it take to make these same projects compliant under the 2024 code or the state's code, and which of those is easier and which of those yields better outcomes. And what we've learned is that at least with those projects, which are largely on the commercial and larger multifamily side, and the caveat is that they are in the Denver metro area, so they're not in climate zone 7 like you all are. But we saw that what this code actually results in is exactly what we were hoping it would result in. A lot of projects are going to have an easier time complying under our state code using high efficiency electric technologies than they would have had under the 2024 code. It reduces the unnecessary costs for those mandatory on-site renewable energy systems. It balances the need for efficiency with the need for decarbonization. And it still provides flexibility. But there are still viable pathways that if you don't want to do electrification, you can still absolutely have your projects comply with our code. But you might just have to do a little bit of extra work to get there, which you would have had to do under the 2024 code anyway. So just to give a couple of examples of models we did, and I focused mostly on multifamily because Paul enlightened me yesterday that most of the new construction you all are looking at in your region is probably going to be in the multifamily sector. And so I picked out the two examples that are in the multifamily sector. The first was an affordable multifamily housing development in the Denver metro area, one built under the commercial code. So one of the weird nuances of energy code is that some multifamily is considered commercial if it's high rise, and some of it, if it's low rise, is considered residential. So it's a little bit wonky. And I picked out one example from each. So a larger multifamily property that would be governed under the commercial energy code was basically planning to use a 2021 IECC building envelope plus mid-efficiency heat pumps. So not the worst efficiency they could be, but also certainly not the most efficient heat pumps out there on the market. And then either they were going to use a high efficiency gas domestic hot water system or electric resistance domestic hot water system. This would have been really difficult to comply under the 2024 IECC. It was highly unlikely that you would be able to show the energy savings necessary or the energy cost savings necessary to comply with the 2024 code because of all these electrification elements. Even though you're still achieving a pretty significant energy cost savings, the baseline you're comparing to also had a relatively significant energy cost savings without going into all the complexities of how you do modeling under the energy code. And then in addition to that, it was able to avoid spending $250,000+ on a solar array. And so what our modeler basically told me is had they had to spend the money on that solar array, that would have killed the project straight up, that there was no money in the budget to be able to do that. And so this project would not have happened under the 2024 IECC. But not only does it happen under the low energy and carbon code, it happens in a way that encourages the electrification of these systems and makes electrification of these systems more viable while still achieving significant cost savings to the residents of that future affordable housing project. The other one is a market rate multifamily housing development, but low rise, so a smaller one. Also was looking originally at using basically the 2021 IECC building envelope. It was looking at high efficiency gas heating and water heating systems, so furnaces and a central domestic hot water system, all fossil fuel. And what basically they found in the modeling was that if you electrified those heating and water heating systems, you could comply with the state's code without doing anything else significant. You wouldn't have to upgrade the envelope any farther beyond that 2021 IECC level. And you wouldn't have to do any of the additional efficiency requirements that you would have had to meet under the 2024 code if you use the heat pump systems. And then it's still, even under the state code, could comply with gas systems as well, but some of that extra efficiency, so maybe some additional insulation and air sealing or more efficient windows or, higher efficiency gas systems relative to what they were proposing to put in, something else you would have had to do in order to get that to comply with the code. But just noting that they would have had to do that with the gas-based building under 2024 IECC anyway. So basically, this just made it so that the switch to heat pumps and heat pump water heaters was viable for this project, and it actually made this project comply more easily with the energy code. So these are a couple of examples that we looked at to show that the code is actually having the effect that we want it to have. It's encouraging that electrification. It's keeping costs down for developers and for residents. And it's helping Colorado meet our decarbonization goals. So this is very early days. We have had, I believe, one jurisdiction in the entire state that has adopted this code or something similar to it. And so we don't have any real world projects that we can actually go back and, that have been gone through design and permitting and construction that we can actually go back and look at yet. But hopefully within the next couple of years, we will have some projects we can start going back and looking at. But for now, we at least have this kind of initial analysis showing us that we seem to be on the right track for what our goals are with this code. So that's all I have. I guess I took a little longer than I had planned, but I think we still have a little time for some questions and discussion about it.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Michelle, how do you want to manage the questions? I can look for hands, or you want to do that? And I don't see anything in the chat, so maybe I can't see everybody, so that makes it hard for me to see who's asking without stepping on each other.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised or anyone in the chat, but I would just say, we have some follow-up questions, and I'm sure some people do. So if people have questions, you can turn your camera on. That's a subtle sign, or raise your hand and we'll call on you. But Paul, you can get us going, and I'm sure people will have questions as we go along.
Yeah, Adam, one question that comes to mind, who are not necessarily by names, but what kind of representation is on the Energy Code Board?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you names too. That's very public, but the representation is pretty broad. It covers all sectors of the building industry. So we're looking at all, on the commercial side, like design engineers, architects, energy modelers, solar and energy efficiency experts, builders. And on the residential side, we also have home builders and folks not only representing the home builders themselves, but also organizations that build both affordable and market rate for sale and for rental housing. So pretty robust representation from the building sector. We also have environmental experts, local government representatives. So we have building officials, sustainability, local government sustainability folks, utility representation. So it's really quite a robust set of folks who were putting this code together.
Okay, and then I did get a question through the chat. I'm going to try to paraphrase it as best as I can to get the answer. So up here in our mountain communities, we have this little anomaly you may not see on the Front Range called snowmelt, or we call it outdoor energy use. How does this code, does the code address in just the building shell and interior energy use, or does this also apply to the total energy use of a building, including outdoor energy use like fire pits and snowmelt?
So I would say mostly this code addresses the building, the envelope, and everything inside. Part of the reason why that is because most of the population of Colorado does not live in a community where these exterior energy considerations are problems for them to deal with, right? I mean, very rarely do you see snowmelt systems in the Denver metro area, for example. And so there are a few provisions in here. The energy code itself addresses some control requirements for outdoor energy systems relating to snowmelt and things like that. But the requirements are relatively minimal in comparison to a lot of the like EEOP or REMP programs that a lot of your jurisdictions have adopted. And the Energy Code Board did consider whether or not to weigh in and provide requirements on those types of systems, and ultimately decided not to. So it's not that this was ignored. It was that it was ultimately decided that jurisdictions with this challenge should figure out should be allowed to figure out ways to address this challenge in a way that's best for your jurisdiction, rather than creating a statewide approach that will apply to relatively few jurisdictions across the state. So that was a long way of saying there are some requirements. There are also a couple of additional, like some of those efficiency credits that I mentioned that you can get if you put in better controls and better, things that essentially prevent the usage of those systems when they're not needed. But it doesn't inherently limit how much exterior energy you can use or address the actual fuel source of that exterior energy directly.
All right, thank you. And I see a hand now from our Jayla. So Jayla, ask your question.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, Adam. I work with Michelle and Paul here at Western Resilience Center. Thanks for your presentation. I was curious about the home size tiers that you shared and how those were selected. I guess I found it surprising that a home up to 5,000 square feet could be considered a starter home, or that kind of small size home. That sounds pretty big to me.
Yeah.
And are we missing an opportunity to, set more stringent requirements on that portion of home sizes that might be more common,
Yeah.
and not necessarily truly starter homes?
It's a great question. So a lot of discussion and debate went into deciding what those home size thresholds were going to be. We did some analysis on census data, on realtor data, to try to get a sense for what Colorado's housing stock looks like from a size perspective, and found that generally about 10%, maybe a little bit over 10% of Colorado's housing stock falls above that 5,000 square foot threshold, whereas about 90% of it falls below. And yet we also did some digging into some of the numbers around energy consumption based on that house size. And we found that while that housing stock only represents about 10% of the state's energy, or excuse me, of the state's housing stock, it represents far more than 10% of the state's energy consumption from the residential sector. And so the Energy Code Board kind of evaluated these different data points and wanted to make sure that a couple of things. One, that because this is a state minimum code, that in kind of introducing these concepts to some jurisdictions for the first time, that it was doing it in a way that was kind of allowing them to get on board in a maybe less stringent environment where there will be fewer homes that they would have to apply these more strict requirements to initially. And then also recognizing that state statute allows local governments to strengthen this code if they want to. So you could always adopt this code and say, well, part of our strategy in strengthening this is instead of saying, well, this small tier applies to anything under 5,000, maybe it's anything under 4,000 or anything under 3,500 or whatever your jurisdiction wanted to implement. So it gets some jurisdictions who have not been considering these home size issues to wet their feet a little bit more easily, but allows other jurisdictions who are more familiar with how this works or wants to apply the more stringent requirements to smaller housing to have the ability to still dial up those requirements if they wanted to. So it was kind of striking a balance where not trying to put too much stringency into the state minimum code initially. And it also gives the state an opportunity in the future potentially to also do the same thing I just described that jurisdictions could do ourselves. Maybe 3, 5, 10 years down the line, we will have the ability to also ratchet those home sizes down as it has become more common practice in the state.
Okay,
Thank
got
you,
it.
Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
I do have maybe time for one more question again from our chat. So the rooftop solar is no longer required, but it can get you points. Our construction environment up here can be tall, skinny homes. The lot sizes or facings are what they are. You might be in the trees. Is there any opportunity for solar gardens or a subscription to a solar garden to offset the rooftop requirement or the ability to use rooftop solar to gain points in the code implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally speaking, the code allows So anywhere, so basically the only place in the code where on-site renewable energy would now be required is for those extra large homes. You have to have an on-site renewable energy system to offset your operational energy. Anywhere else, solar is voluntary. And if a property is wanting to use solar, basically what the code would require is in order to achieve the credits under the structure of the code from solar, you would have to first maximize any solar you can do on site. So basically, if you can do any solar on site, you have to. And then any amount that you want to be able to do beyond what is capable on site, or if nothing is capable on site, in the example you gave, Paul, where there's maybe very little roof space or it's everything just being shaded or something to that effect, then offsite procurement options are allowed to be used to help with renewable energy requirements or options. So something like a solar garden, you could purchase electricity from a solar garden. If you're a residential customer, if you're a commercial customer, you could do power purchase agreement or any number of procurement options for off-site renewable energy once you've maximized whatever that on-site renewable energy was.
All right. Thank you. Michelle, can we sneak one more question? We have a hand by Ryan up.
I think we can. We have about 2 minutes remaining. So quick question from Ryan. Thank you.
Hey, Adam, thank you for your time. My question was sort of a carry on from what Paul just asked. Curious your thoughts on sort of solar farms as in terms of energy production per dollar of invested capital versus on-site solar. You know, how do you feel about that?
I will say I'm not as much of an expert at the utility scale or larger scale solar production. There's other folks in our office that do that and kind of provided input here. But our general assessment was that because utilities are already required to transition their electricity generation, well, I should say the investor-owned utilities are required to transition their electricity generation, and then the co-ops and munis are encouraged to follow along voluntarily with the state's renewable energy targets for electricity generation. That because those investments are already being made, we saw that as being a more cost-effective strategy, larger scale solar development, and alternatives. I mean, the utilities also have a lot more alternatives when it comes to investing in renewable energy, like wind, geothermal, other types of solutions beyond just solar. Whereas realistically, in a residential setting, solar is probably your only option for on-site renewable energy, unless you live out way out some of the huge property where you can put a big wind tower on there if you wanted to. So I think that we found that the cost effectiveness, generally speaking, of the utilities being able to build out that renewable energy is more, cheaper per kilowatt of capacity that you're building than it would be for individual properties to do it. But we also definitely do not want to dismiss the benefits that on-site renewable energy can provide from, resilience and other kinds of benefits, especially if it's paired with electric, storage, battery storage, and things like that. So that's why it was more, it's like we didn't take renewable energy out because we still see there's a lot of value in it. We just didn't want to mandate it when what we see is that utility scale generation build out is going to be on a per energy unit basis going to be more cost effective.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we have to cut off the questions, but Michelle, if you want to wrap this great meeting up, we'll let you do that.
Sounds great. Well, Adam, thank you so much for your time and your presentation and for joining us. It's really exciting to hear that these upcoming energy codes are focused both on decarbonization and affordability, which we know to be pressing opportunities and challenges for Western Slope, Colorado, and specifically Northwest Colorado too. So thank you so much for reaching out to us. You're a great resource. We appreciate the Energy Office so much. And thank you all for joining for the conversation today. So look forward to seeing you all. And it looks like maybe Adam, just catch this one last question from Luke Phillips, just for you to know that, and we can see if we can connect you if you'd want to respond to that one as well. But everyone, enjoy the rest of the week. I hope you're looking ahead to wonderful Thanksgiving plans with friends and loved ones, and look forward to seeing you next month for our community partner update. So have a great day. Talk to you soon.